This is part 2 of what we began last week, 2 and 2 equals 5. What I want to discuss in more detail this morning with you is the implications of what it means to be living in a world wherein we know 2 and 2 is 5 and not 4. Lesson 70, the beginning of that lesson makes some very clear statements that tell us that guilt is in our mind, all unhappiness and pain is in our mind, and salvation and therefore happiness is in our mind, and there is nothing outside. There is nothing outside of us that can give us pain or bring on suffering, and there's nothing outside of us that can give us happiness or peace. That's because 2 and 2 equals 5. To live in a world under the law of 2 and 2 is 5, meaning we have a total shift in perspective. Rather than looking at the world from the world's terms and behaving and giving response to situations and relationships on the world's terms, what we learned in the past, we do now from a totally different perspective, what Jesus calls in chapter 23, above the battleground. To be above the battleground is to be with him in the mind, in the decision-making mind, which when it's identified with Jesus as his teacher, also becomes an observing mind. In other words, we look. And as we look out on a 2 plus 2 equals 4 world, we recognize that everything in that world is a projection of a thought system we have chosen in our minds, either the egos or the Holy Spirit, either a thought system of separation, differentiation and specialness, or a thought system of peace, joining, healing, and love. And from that decision that our mind makes, we look out on a world, either a world in which things seem to make sense, in other words, that we are separated, and salvation consists of one or the other, namely, based on the principle of one or the other, namely that my salvation depends on your losing. Jesus tells us that the rock on which salvation rests is that everyone wins and nobody loses. Well, the rock on which the ego's salvation rests is that someone wins and someone loses, and we want to be the one who wins. In other words, that the ego's game is really the game of seesaw, where in order for the game to be fun, someone is up and the other is down. Right? And we always want to be the one who's up. Our salvation is always one or the other, as opposed to the Holy Spirit salvation of together or not at all. Right? That makes no sense from the ego's point of view. It makes no sense from a 2 plus 2 equals 4 point of view, where we know the laws, we know how things work here. In order for us to survive as physical organisms, we have to destroy microorganisms that are in the air. We have to destroy things that we think of as living, whether they be animal, whether they be poultry, whether they be fish, or they be vegetables. Something has to be ingested, which marks the end of that existence, of that substance's existence, so that we can continue to survive. And that's the law of the jungle, but it's the law of the ego, and it's the law of the ego's world. No matter how much we want to sugarcoat it and say this is the natural law, there is nothing natural here. 2 and 2 is 5. Right? We want to live our lives so that when people look at our lives, these lives would make no sense. We want to live our lives so that when people look at us, they would realize that we may be in this world, but there is a love in us, there's a peace in us that is not of this world. So to live under the law of 2 plus 2 equals 5 means that we follow a different drummer. We listen to a different drummer, Jesus being the drummer rather than the ego and its world. That we do what is consistent with the thought system that says no one loses and everyone wins. We live we live a life that is consistent with the recognition that we are minds and not bodies. That the mind, namely the decision-making mind, is the cause of everything that happens. It's the cause of all of our pain, all of our suffering, all of the world's suffering. It's also the cause of our happiness and our joy. A happiness and a joy that if it comes from the Holy Spirit is not based on someone losing. It's not based on fulfilling our need. Jesus tells us right at the beginning of the text that the only real pleasure comes in doing God's will. That's a 2 plus 2 equals 5 statement. Our pleasure does not come at someone's expense. Our pleasure does not come because of a fulfillment or satisfaction of a bodily need. It comes from satisfying the mind's need to be at peace, the mind's need to return to sanity, the mind's need to remember that 2 and 2 equal 5. And when we realize that 2 and 2 equals 5, then we recognize the only true equation that exists at the end, and that is 1 plus 1 equals 1. one God, one Son, and their indivisible unity constitutes the perfect oneness and the perfect love. That is heaven, that is reality, and that is truth. And we seek to reflect that truth, living according to the principles of forgiveness, which is 2 plus 2 equals 5. And that undoes everything the world has told us is true. We undo the lies, and now we accept the only truth. That is 1 plus 1 equals 1.